Senior developer interview questions. I have had a hard time finding these for Angular. Yeah, so basically here are a bunch, 18 senior Angular interview questions. Let's see how many I can answer. I'm curious because I also see this for the first time. So let's go through. Let's see how that goes. So let's directly start with the first one. If you had to pick only 5 libraries as dependencies for your Angular app, which ones would you pick? So this is a pretty interesting question. I'm also guessing that you do not mean basically because that you do not mean the ones that Angular already brings. So Angular already brings dependencies out of the box, right? So for example, currently RxJS is a dependency, TypeScript is a dependency. I guess you are not talking about those. You are talking about additional ones. And if you're talking about additional ones, I am actually currently in the situation where I think that you should use, or I try to use as little dependencies as possible. But still there are some which I think are really, really valuable, and some that are an absolute must for me. And the absolute must for me, the one that I use in all the projects, is Prettier. So if you do not know Prettier is for me the must dependency that you need to have, because it allows you to format your code based on rules. It allows you to do this on commit hooks, and basically it allows you to easily work together as a team, because you just do your Prettier config, your code formats nicely, and it's not dependent on which editor you use. Whenever you commit something, Prettier has you covered, and you decide as a team on some Prettier rules, and then Prettier formats the code. So that's an absolute must. Speaking of Prettier, when you use Prettier in this workflow, you probably want to run Prettier on every commit. Basically, whenever you commit something, you want to run Prettier on the changed files. So therefore, probably you will use something like Husky or like lint-staged to actually run Prettier in the correct stage. So that's then another dependency that I use. Then what else? If I do some UI stuff, which with Angular you do UI stuff, I probably would go for Tailwind or some other UI component library like Taiga UI. Can I type? Taiga. Or for some other component library like Taiga UI or Angular Material or so on. Something like this. Then usually I am not so happy with the out-of-the-box functionality, like testing functionality. I do not like to use Karma. I prefer Jest or something else. So then usually Jest becomes also a dependency. But Angular now has a Jest builder, but still it will be a dependency, right? So those are kind of my go-to dependencies. Second one, what's your go-to strategy for debugging Angular components? Well, this strongly depends on what I am debugging. Depends if I am debugging something like some UI errors. Then basically what I often do is just log out with string interpolation, like some signals or some state to the template with the JSON pipe, so that I can clearly see what is actually rendered. The advantage you have over logging it out to the template versus logging it out to the console is that in the template you see that it also, if change detection runs or not. In the console, maybe change detection doesn't run, but it still gets logged out. But in the template, you really see then also the change detection stuff. Then if I use some logic, I probably use a normal breakpoint with a debugger, right? With the debugger directly in the browser. So I use source maps to go to my component code and just step through it. If it's something injector related, I use the Angular DevTools to see the injector hierarchy. So I would probably say something like this. Have you ever created a custom RxJS operator? What problem did it solve? Yes, I've done that. If I remember correctly, it was a operator, which you could basically put in, and it filters out all the alphanumeric keystrokes. So let's say you have a stream, you do like a from event, key down or whatever, and then you get like all the key downs, but you only want to be notified about the alphanumeric, so only about numbers or like real characters, but not about spaces, left key and so on, and escape and all this kind of stuff, only about those. So for those we created a alphanumeric our custom RxJS operator. And the reason why we did that was because, what was the use case again? It was for some UI component. Yeah. So it was for a dropdown. So basically imagine you have a dropdown, and now in that dropdown you also want to support some custom search. So let's say you come to the dropdown and a bunch of items pop up, and now you want to search those items. So let's say you have like football clubs. Of course, you have Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, and all the kinds of stuff. And of course, you want to jump to Real Madrid. Let's be honest. So therefore, you type Real, but and then you will filter and you will jump to Real Madrid, or you will just jump to that. And what you do not want, so basically the dropdown also allows you to navigate with key down and key up. And what you do not want is to filter on key down or key up. You just want to jump down. So you want to handle those differently. And basically you do not want your filter logic to trigger if you do key down. So that's the reason why we did this alphanumeric operator, which was filtering out all those things. So what unconventional challenges did you have while developing architecting Angular apps? I mean, we will later in the stream also see the article that Thomas wrote with Angular architecture challenges, which is a brilliant article. Also, he has written an amazing book about this. So check that out for sure. But basically, my unconventional challenges was, it's not really apps, it was more like libs. But what I had is I encountered legacy code bases with a lot of circular dependencies. And you could really see how those circular dependencies made the bundle size blow up, made stuff much more complicated to develop, because you get circular dependencies. It's very unclear what is going to happen in some cases. And then also if you have these circular dependencies and you mix in reactive systems like RxJS, so that was really pretty challenging for us. How do you manage API type consistency between front-end mobile app and backend? So yeah, this also strongly depends on how your backend is written and how your frontend is written and what kind of tooling you use. So I have worked in projects where we used Swagger as the documentation for the interface, and Swagger could generate TypeScript types automatically. That is something. You can also go something into the direction of contract testing, where you have automated tests that test against a interface, like a REST endpoint or something, and they test if the contract is still valid, and if not, you as a consumer know that something changed. I have seen that in practice, but lately, of course, I worked in monorepos where we have, for example, a Nest.js backend and an Angular frontend all together in the same repository, and then you can just generate an interface which basically is used in some shared folder, and that interface is then used on the backend as well as on the frontend, and that was working pretty nicely. Other solutions here could also be, if you want to go for some fancier stuff, you could use TRCP, for example, and then you also have it solved. If you are interested in TRCP, I think I made a video on Angular Experts. I think I made a video and the blog post. So probably go to Angular Experts blog and you will find Angular and TRCP. So maximum type safety across the stack, right? And you will also find the video here somewhere. You don't find the video here. But if you go to my YouTube channel, of course, isn't there here Angular and TRPC? So what's your approach to optimizing the performance of large Angular components. So, well, this kind of depends what you mean with performance. But I would say like the first thing that I would do, of course, is checking. I don't know if this is the performance of the component itself, but it's more like the whole application. But for sure, use on push. Always use on push. Then I would make sure that the component is also standalone, that it uses all the modern stuff. I would check that the component doesn't have any unnecessary subscriptions hanging, so that basically all the observables, in case you use observables, are either you subscribed with the async pipe, or our subscriptions are properly cleaned up in an ng on destroy or with a destroy ref. Probably better with a destroy ref because it's the modern way. Or you can make sure that your observables are properly converted to signals and you use signals in the UI, right? That's something I would make sure that there is no subscriptions. Then I would analyze the component itself for like, are there big things which take a long time to load? So let's say you have a component which has like a huge graphic or something, an expensive graphic with a library in the background, which gets loaded, which makes it slow. Then I would probably use a defer block on that and lazy load that part so that the whole application becomes faster. Then, of course, in terms of runtime performance, that you do not have like unnecessary loops. Make sure that you do not have some template expressions which extensively run change detection, because that can be run too often. And if you do expensive computations in there, that can impact performance. Have you used TypeScript generics to simplify handling complex interfaces in Angular? If so, any examples? Yes, we have. I think recently, what was the example? We had some menu item. So basically something like this, but a bit more complex, like compared to the Twitter item, because you have then basically, if you click on one menu item, there are sub-menu items. If you click on a sub-menu items, there are further sub-menu items. And now if you click one down, so imagine something like this, like you have a top level menu item, you have like a secondary level menu item, and you would have a third level. And here's another. Yeah, I don't know if it becomes clear, but kind of like this. All right. So that would be the first level. Here would be like the second level, and wow, beautiful, huh? So something like this. And now if you click here, what will happen is basically you want to mark this as active. Let's do back is active. But you also want to mark the tree up. So something like that. Now that whole menu, so how do you mark that up? So we basically made like a service which allows you to call like something like resolve menu active state or something, right? Which is called once you click here. And what this service expects is a menu item, some menu. But the problem is the menu is just like some generic thing, but you can hang whatever you want on there. You can hang any kind of stuff on the data structure. So you can imagine the data structure looks something like this. So you have an interface menu which has some required properties like active, which is a boolean, for example, something like that. Why is it all centered? And now what the consumer can do is he can still extend that menu and create his own structure. So he could come and say const or my menu is equal to something like this. So I have like an active, true, and probably here we also have, sorry for the sake of completeness, there will also be children, which is of type menu, right? And then you will have, for example, also a title here. Title, some title. And then here children and so on. And now the idea is that you can pass this in, and we just say in this resolve menu state active, we just say, well, this is the signature, and we get a T which extends the menu interface, but the menu itself is then passed, and we can say, well, my menu is of type my menu, and that one extends the menu, and then you pass it in here like my menu. And the good thing is, based on that, we can then do stuff in the function, and we get here like the T, menu is of type T, of course, and we can return T. I think it's a T array, but yeah, we can return the T. So that's kind of like the idea where we used it. Can you use ngdeep? This is a pretty interesting one, because ngdeep was always considered kind of like a bad practice, and it was deprecated, or like, no, it was marked for deprecation, but now officially it's unmarked. So it's still there, you can still use it. Mostly you use it if you have some content projection, for example, or you want to style some third-party library. And basically what is happening is, once you use ngdeep on a style rule, you basically, it becomes a global style kinda, right? And if you are interested in alternatives here, I think this blog is still on Medium, ngdeep alternatives. Yeah, so this is basically an article that you can check out if you're looking for ngdeep alternatives. So I think I've split this into 3 articles because it was too complex, but here basically the problem, or what ngdeep does, is explained, and then here is like how to style content. So basically, if you break it down, it's like we want to style encapsulated components from the outside, or we want to accept style from projected content. And then there are 2 articles which basically dive into how you can style projected content. So I think here is mainly the saying that often you can use some different approach. So here probably this is projected and doesn't have like a margin. So it would be better to just use a flex gap here, but you could still have a global style theoretically. But then I would, to be honest, back in the day it was deprecated and this was kind of okay, but now I would prefer ngdeep over this. Yeah, then this one, I don't remember what was written here, but feel free to check that out. But generally you can use it in certain scenarios, I think it's fine. How do you ensure usability in your SCSS for large-scale Angular projects? Well, there are different approaches. I think one of the most important things is that you have some sort of design system in your application, because that makes it easier to move forward. So one thing is to have reusable SCSS, but I think one of the cool things now in modern web development is CSS variables, because you can leverage those CSS variables easily to generate like custom themings, or like basically all kind of stuff. But generally, if you speak about SCSS, so still, for the CSS variable, I think it's good to have like one centralized place where you have the variables and everything. But speaking about SCSS, I think it makes sense to have to use some mixins, some functions that you can use to calculate some stuff. That's mainly how we reuse it. We also use SCSS modules to reuse some other components and export other style sheets and export them. Another thing is the base function of SCSS, which is pretty nice to use because you can use the base function and then you can extend stuff. So that's kind of nice. Have you contributed to the Angular ecosystem community? If so, what was your contribution? Oh boy. Yeah, I've done that. I have multiple contributions to the Angular ecosystem. So where do we start? So I've done 1 or 2 PRs on Angular itself, but those were small fixes which I don't even remember exactly. We have also worked together or just written with the Angular core team, and they were then able to do some cool features that we needed. So one of the features I remember is that you can have multiple class selectors and that you can then access them in the style sheet via the host property. So that you can say I have multiple selectors, and based on the host, you can then style them differently, kinda. So that was a cool contribution. Then generally, of course, like one of my most famous or most downloaded project is SVG2TS. That's a project that allows you to split icons into dedicated chunks so that it not only becomes tree shakeable but also splittable across multiple lazy loaded feature modules and chunks. That's one of the projects, and I have ngSortGrid, which is a project that allows you to sort stuff in multiple directions. Pretty HTML is a cool helper for, yeah, and so on. Basically, whenever you have some contributions, right, you can start diving into this. I think it's a pretty cool question because it shows if you have done something there, right? Yeah. What is your strategy for refactoring a bloated Angular component? So what I would do if I encounter a bloated Angular component is I would for sure check if it can be split into multiple components, if there are reusable parts in it. Then I would also check, like, is the separation correct? Is it correct that we have, or do we mix business logic with view logic in the component? Because if it's business logic, probably can be extracted to a service, which improves testability and reusability of the whole thing. That would be something to check if it's bloated. Yeah, generally, basically, how can you split stuff out into reusable parts? That's how I would go about it. What was the most complex form you worked with? That was actually pretty recent, like I think half a year ago or something, where we were building some really interactive layout builders. So the idea was that you have a layout builder where developers can use it, and they can use something like, you can imagine it like a Tailwind or a CSS grid layout builder, where you could come and you could say, okay, I have a row, and this row is like has a blue background, it has a border, it has this, and then you can dynamically configure columns. So you can say, okay, I add a column, that column is 2 of 3, I add one column which is like 1 of 3, and so on. Like you could configure this kind of stuff and build like a whole grid layout. And the challenging thing is that upfront you don't know how many form controls there are. So basically you use form array to dynamically handle, because somebody could click and add extra rows. So let me quickly illustrate this. So let's say you have this configurator, and you could say here, well, by the way, I have a plus. So inside here is plus. So you add an extra row, and if you click that plus, because inside here you have a bunch of form controls, right, to configure some options. And if you do the plus, you would add an extra form control on the fly. And the crazy thing was that in there you had basically pluses for those kind of things as well. So like this would be column, for example, you can do plus and then you add a new column control, something like this. And that was pretty challenging, because you have like highly dynamic forms with form arrays, and you can at any point add stuff, remove stuff, because yeah, that's in the next thing. You also have like a remove, so you need to handle this kind of stuff, right? Adding, removing, and so on. So that was challenging. Good. How do you implement validation for in complex forms? How do you implement validation in complex forms? Yeah, I would just display, depends. This is very broad questions, I would say, because like generally you want to display error message directly on the control. And then I would go with something whenever you blur a control that you show an error message directly underneath this control that is required. And if you submit that, basically everything turns red. Yeah, forms are challenging, period. Forms are really challenging. That is true. And especially, as I said, if you go into dynamic forms, then it's becoming super hard. Yeah, how do you implement? So I don't know what is really wanted as an answer here, but I would just basically, for each form control, doesn't matter how complex it goes, you display the error directly where it appears. And yeah, this is more like also than a UX question, like how much error do you want to show if somebody submits? Do you want to show like errors on the fly everywhere? Do you want to make the whole form red or not? Yeah. Signals, observables, promises. Tell me about the difference and when to use which. Cool. So basically there is kind of like this nice drawing where you would have something like this. Whoa, let's do it like this. So here we would have like single value, and here we have multiple values. All right. And then on this side of the thing, we would have like pull. Whoa. And then a push. And basically what we have here is a function promises. Here we have observables, and what was the last one? From multiple values pull. Not sure if I remember. What was it? Yeah. It's an iterator, right? It is an iterator. And then the funny thing is that signals, so basically this explains it already, the promise and the observable thing. So single value, push-based single value is promises. So promises only deliver one single value, and then they either throw an error, or they give you a value, or they throw an error. Observables, on the other hand, can deliver multiple values. So imagine a stream of clicks. So if I click multiple times, that would be a stream of clicks. You cannot handle this kind of stuff with promises. And the special thing about signals is that signals are kind of like here in the middle, I would say. Because signals are either on one hand also push-based, because they deliver value, but they do not deliver value if you do not pull it. So they are kind of somewhere here in the middle. And what was the question again? Signals, tell me about the difference in when to use which. So yeah, when to use which. So basically, again, use promises. I mean, promises, I see the valid use case for promises I see currently, or in the future I see it once we do fetch. So for HTTP request, I could see promises if RxJS would go away. I could see how promises could be the value or the data type of choice. Observable, use them for like streams, like really events that come over time, like for example click streams or something like that. Those are cases for observables. And signals, basically I would always use whenever there's some kind of state. So basically, can you ask the question, or once you can ask the question, does it make sense No, I have to phrase it like this. So use signals whenever it makes sense to ask the question, what is the current value of the thing? So for example, an HTTP request, there is no current value of an HTTP request. I mean, there is a value of the status maybe, but not of the request itself. So you get something or you don't get it. But with forms, for example, it's valid to ask like, hey, what is the state of this form? Is it valid? Is it invalid? So then I would use signals. Boy, how many? Have you implemented custom decorators? So if so, what was the use case? Yes, I have implemented custom decorators. I have even written a blog post about custom decorators, but in practice, I actually never used them because I always found a better solution. But yeah, I have implemented them for logging stuff, basically. I think that was this blog post, TypeScript 5 decorators. How will RxJS go away? For example, we have router events returning observable that will be changed as well. Yeah. I don't know what they will use for router events. That I'm curious. The biggest worry I have, not worry, but like, if we speak about making RxJS optional, for me, what I ask myself is like, but it's basically the same question. How do you do this in React today? How do you, for example, let's say you have an HTTP request, right? So currently what we do is, so currently you do this.http.get something, right? And then you pipe that. Or like, let's even say, let's say you have a stream of clicks. So you would have clicks, and then you pipe those clicks, and then you switch map those into some HTTP requests, right? And then maybe you do like error handling and so on. But only this case. How do you do this without RxJS? How do you take a bunch of clicks and you cancel outgoing requests and only listen to the latest one without RxJS? This one. How to do that? I mean, I don't know in the React world if people just don't care about these cases, or how do they do this? I'm curious what Chipotle says. How would you write something like this without RxJS? Yeah, but he does an event listener and then he waits a response. Yeah, but how about the cancellation of the outgoing? Curious. Let a board controller. Now you see what you have to do. Like, look at this. Yeah, so those are the kind of things where I see, and then it gets more complicated. I mean, switch map, but then what if you have like some other behaviors? So yeah, but back to the decorators. What have we done here? So we have written a decorator log method, which, for example, yeah, does something like, so you greet. What? Yeah. So this is basically an additional log output, decorator factory, and so blah blah blah. I don't remember how this was working, but it was fun to explore, but I never used it in practice. What kind of states do we have in app, and how do you manage them? I mean, we have UI states. For UI states, I would probably go with signals. Then we have application-wide state. There I still think like general application state is yeah, it's still something that you probably will use NGRX or the signal store or something, I guess. So for decorators, recently I'm using a decorators on methods that need to show a confirm action model. Seems like a good, yeah, seems like a valid use case. That seems like a valid use case. That's cool. What's your approach to lazy loading modules in Angular? I mean, here, what else can we say? Like, probably I would use NGRX for bigger applications. And then you basically manage that with all the tools you get from NGRX, with effects, with reducers, with selectors, and all this. I would probably go with something like that. Or if it's a smaller application, I would actually try to use something like the 10 stack. How is it called? 10 stack? Sorry, Angular query. It's just coming from the React world, from the 10 stack, but Angular query it's called, where you basically see the whole state just as a cache, and basically as a cache from the backend. And then once a new response comes, you just invalidate that cache and it automatically refetches and does that stuff. So I think that's cool. That could be cool. Also there, I've done a video if you're interested in this. What's your approach to lazy loading modules in Angular? So generally, I would not use modules at all anymore. But if I have to lazy load modules, I would use the router, of course, to lazy load modules. But generally, I would go with standalone components only nowadays. Then you can lazy load standalone components also with the use of the router. But it's also cool that with the newest API, with the defer API, you can also lazy load some heavy components inside your application. You can prefetch them. That's pretty cool. And that's the benefit of having standalone. So with the defer, standalone becomes objectively better than modules. That's basically it. We went through all of them. I think most of them were it's a sort of cool questions. I would really love to see some of those questions. Like if you go to an interview, I think those questions are pretty cool because they are not like, hey, can you do this specific algorithm or whatever? They give you like open, those are open questions, and they allow you to show if you have expertise in that. They also allow the company to see I think it's a nice set of questions because it's more a good entry point for a discussion. And I think I like the interviews where you feel comfortable because here, for example, it's not like, hey, by the way, do you know X library X? And then you maybe don't know because it's super specific to the use case. And then, yeah, I think this is super cool because it's an open question. You can speak from your experience. You can say what were the libraries and the stuff that you were using the most. I think those are such cool questions. And they give like the company who's doing the interview a pretty nice idea if you have experience in that regard or not. Because I think often in the interviews, it's more like finding, that's my personal opinion. For me, when I do the interviews, it's more like finding out somebody or finding the person that is passionate about what they do, that have experience, and not about, do you know the super specific tool that we in our use case have and none of the, or nobody in the world uses besides us? Or can you do like algorithm XYZ? Because that's not the day job, right? On a day job, you will figure it out. If you are passionate about, you will figure it out. And I think the questions are really to figure out, do you have experience? Are you passionate about? Do you know what you are talking about? And those are great questions for this.